No furnace, no electricity, no modern insulation. Out there in the wilderness, winter nights brought a simple choice: stay warm or die. The temperature could drop to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit in a matter of hours. Wind cut through cabin walls like they were made of paper. One poorly managed fire, one failed heating system, one night without proper preparation, and an entire family could freeze to death before dawn. They needed heat sources that could burn all night without going out. They needed insulation that could trap warmth with nothing but natural materials. They needed techniques that could keep children alive when the cold tried to kill them. The families who survived knew the secrets. They knew how to turn a freezing cabin into a warm sanctuary. But how did frontier families maintain life-saving heat during nights when temperatures plummeted below zero? What were the heating systems that could keep a family warm for 12 hours straight without modern technology? How did they create insulation that worked as well as anything we have today? And what were the emergency protocols that saved lives when everything else failed? Today, we're exploring the sophisticated thermal survival methods that kept frontier families alive through the deadliest winter nights in American history. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America. The winter of 1880 to 1881 was one of the harshest on record across the American frontier. Temperatures in Montana and the Dakotas dropped to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit for weeks at a time. Families who had survived previous winters found themselves facing conditions that tested every survival technique they knew. The difference between those who lived and those who died often came down to a few critical decisions made in the hours before sunset. These weren't just heating techniques, they were life-or-death protocols that determined whether a family would see another spring. The heat source strategy. The orange glow of the fire reflects off the ice-covered windows as Thomas Morrison adds another split log to the massive stone fireplace. Outside, the wind howls at minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit, but inside his cabin, his wife Sarah tends to their sleeping children in beds warmed by heated stones. The fire has been burning for 6 hours straight, and it will burn for 6 more. This isn't luck, this is engineering. The foundation of frontier thermal survival was the heat source, but not just any fire would do. Families needed heating systems that could burn efficiently for 12 hours straight, provide consistent heat distribution, and operate safely in enclosed spaces. The difference between a good heating system and a great one was often the difference between life and death. The fireplace design was critical for maximum heat efficiency. Frontier families built massive stone or brick fireplaces with deep fireboxes that could accommodate logs up to 4 feet long. The firebox was designed with angled sides that reflected heat into the room rather than up the chimney. The back wall was often slanted forward to direct more heat into the living space. The chimney itself was engineered with a damper system that could be adjusted to control airflow and heat retention. The thermal mass principle was incorporated into fireplace construction. Large stones or bricks absorbed heat during peak burning and continued radiating warmth for hours after the fire died down. Some families built elaborate stone heat sinks that extended from the fireplace into the room, creating thermal batteries that stored and released heat gradually. But the real innovation was in the fuel preparation and management. Families spent months preparing for winter by cutting, splitting, and seasoning hardwood. Oak, hickory, and maple were preferred because they burned hot and long, producing dense coals that could maintain heat for hours. The wood was split to specific sizes: large logs for overnight burning, medium splits for maintaining heat, and kindling for quick temperature boosts. The seasoning process was crucial for efficient burning. Green wood contained too much moisture and would create smoke rather than heat. Properly seasoned wood had been cut and split in spring, then dried for at least 6 months. Families could tell seasoned wood by its lighter weight, cracked ends, and hollow sound when struck together. The loading technique required understanding of combustion science. Large logs were placed at the back of the firebox, with smaller pieces in front. This created a staged burning system where the large logs provided consistent heat, while the smaller pieces could be adjusted for temperature control. The key was creating a coal bed, a layer of glowing coals that could ignite new wood instantly and maintain consistent heat output. Airflow management was essential for efficient burning. Families learned to control the fire's intensity by adjusting the damper and managing air intake. Too much air caused the fire to burn too quickly, wasting fuel. Too little air caused incomplete combustion and dangerous smoke buildup. The optimal airflow created a clean, hot burn that maximized heat output. Overnight burning was the ultimate test of a heating system. Families developed techniques for banking fires that could burn unattended for 8 to 10 hours. This involved loading the firebox with large hardwood logs, adjusting the damper to reduce airflow, and covering the coals with ash to slow combustion. A properly banked fire would still have live coals in the morning that could be revived with kindling and fresh air. The heat distribution was managed through strategic placement of thermal mass and air circulation. Large stones were heated in the fire during the day, then moved to beds and corners of the cabin to radiate heat throughout the night. Some families built stone or brick heat, sinks near the fireplace that absorbed heat during peak burning and released it slowly over hours. Cooking integration maximized the utility of the heating system. Families designed their fireplaces to accommodate cooking pots and baking ovens using the same fire for both heating and food preparation. This efficiency was crucial when fuel was limited and every piece of wood had to serve multiple purposes. A good fire is like a good friend. It keeps you warm all night and is still there in the morning, wrote frontier settler Mary Austin in her 1883 diary. Safety protocols were essential because a house fire in winter was a death sentence. Families maintained water barrels near the fireplace, kept chimneys clean to prevent creosote fires, and established escape plans in case of emergency. Children were taught fire safety from an early age because their lives depended on understanding the dangers and proper procedures. The backup heating systems provided redundancy when the main fireplace couldn't meet heating demands. Some families built secondary heating sources, smaller fireplaces in bedrooms, wood-burning stoves, or braziers that could provide localized heat. These backup systems were particularly important during extreme cold snaps when a single heat source wasn't sufficient. The Insulation Revolution. Sarah Morrison runs her hand along the interior wall of their cabin, feeling the warmth trapped between the double wall construction. Outside, the temperature has dropped to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, but the interior wall is barely cool to the touch. Hidden between these walls is a sophisticated insulation system built from materials the forest provided for free, and it works better than anything available in the cities. Frontier families revolutionized insulation by necessity, creating thermal barriers that rivaled modern materials using only natural resources. These weren't crude attempts at warmth. They were engineered systems that could maintain interior temperatures 60 to 70 degrees warmer than outside conditions. The double wall construction was the foundation. Families built cabin walls with an inner and outer layer of logs, creating a cavity that could be filled with insulating material. The outer wall faced the weather, while the inner wall created a warm, dry interior surface. The gap between walls was typically 6 to 8 inches, providing space for substantial insulation. The insulation materials were harvested from the surrounding environment. Dried moss was the most common filler, particularly sphagnum moss, which had natural antimicrobial properties and excellent thermal resistance. Families collected moss in late summer, dried it thoroughly, and packed it tightly between walls. The moss created thousands of tiny air pockets that trapped heat and prevented cold transfer. Animal hair and fur provided additional insulation. Families saved hair from butchered animals, fur from trapped game, and even human hair from haircuts. This material was mixed with moss to create a dense, warm barrier. Some families used down feathers from waterfowl, creating insulation that was remarkably similar to modern down jackets. Clay and mud chinking sealed gaps between logs and insulation. This wasn't just stuffing cracks, it was creating an airtight seal that prevented heat loss through convection. The chinking was mixed with animal hair or chopped straw to prevent cracking, and it was applied in multiple layers for maximum effectiveness. The floor insulation was equally important. Families built raised floors with a crawl space underneath that could be filled with insulating material. Dried leaves, straw, and animal bedding created a thermal barrier that prevented ground cold from penetrating the living space. Some families even kept small animals like chickens under the floor, using their body heat as an additional warming source. Window and door sealing required special attention because these were the primary sources of heat loss. Families hung heavy blankets or furs over windows at night, creating an additional insulation layer. Doors were fitted with leather or fur strips around the edges to prevent drafts. Some families built double-door entries with a small vestibule that prevented cold air from entering the main living space. The roof insulation was critical because heat rises and escapes through the top of the structure. Families built thick sod roofs with multiple layers of insulating material. The bottom layer was usually bark or split wood, followed by layers of moss, leaves, and finally sod. This created a roof that was not only waterproof, but also provided excellent thermal protection. Maintenance was ongoing throughout the winter. Families regularly checked chinking for cracks, added fresh insulation material as needed, and repaired any damage that could compromise the thermal envelope. A small gap in insulation could create a cold spot that would freeze water or make sleeping impossible. If you want to learn more about the construction techniques that made these thermal systems possible, check out our episode on how mountain men built cabins from scratch, 1.5-hour compilation. The body heat management. The Morrison children sleep peacefully in their shared bed, surrounded by heated stones wrapped in wool blankets and covered with layers of furs and quilts. Their body heat, combined with the thermal mass of the stones, creates a warm microenvironment that will keep them comfortable all night. This isn't just bedding. This is a sophisticated personal heating system that could mean the difference between waking up healthy or hypothermic. Frontier families understood that managing body heat was just as important as heating the cabin. They developed personal warming systems that maximized the body's natural heat production while minimizing heat loss through radiation, conduction, and convection. The layering system was the foundation of body heat management. Families wore multiple layers of clothing that trapped air between them, creating insulation similar to modern thermal wear. The base layer was usually linen or wool against the skin, followed by wool shirts, vests, and outer garments. Each layer trapped air and created a thermal barrier. Wool was the preferred material because it retained insulating properties even when damp from perspiration. Families raised sheep specifically for wool production, and women spent countless hours spinning, weaving, and knitting warm clothing. A complete winter outfit for one person could represent months of work, but it was essential for survival. The heated stone system was a frontier innovation that provided hours of warmth. Large stones were heated in the fire until they were almost too hot to handle, then wrapped in wool blankets and placed in beds before sleep. These stones could provide warmth for 6 to 8 hours, gradually releasing heat throughout the night. Some families used heated bricks or metal objects for the same purpose. Shared body heat was a survival strategy that required careful planning. Families slept together in shared beds, combining their body heat to create a warm sleeping environment. Children slept between adults, taking advantage of the higher body heat production of larger people. This wasn't just about comfort, it was about preventing hypothermia in the most vulnerable family members. The bed construction was engineered for heat retention. Frontier beds were built with thick straw or feather mattresses that provided insulation from the cold floor. Multiple layers of blankets, quilts, and furs created a thermal envelope around the sleepers. Some families built enclosed bed areas with curtains that could be drawn to trap warm air. Hot food and drinks were used strategically to raise core body temperature before sleep. Families consumed hot soup, tea or warm milk in the evening to increase internal heat production. The digestive process itself generated heat, and warm liquids provided immediate temperature elevation that could last for hours. Exercise and movement were used to generate heat when other methods weren't sufficient. Families developed indoor exercises that could be performed in small spaces to increase circulation and heat production. Children were taught to move their fingers and toes regularly to prevent frostbite, and adults used calisthenics to warm up when they felt cold. The breathing technique was a lesser-known but effective warming method. Families learned to breathe warm air into their hands or under blankets to create pockets of heated air. This technique was particularly useful for warming extremities that were prone to frostbite. Emergency warming protocols were essential for situations when normal heating failed. Families knew how to recognize the early signs of hypothermia and had specific procedures for rewarming affected individuals. This included skin-to-skin contact, warm water immersion, and gradual rewarming techniques that prevented shock. The human body is the best heater you'll ever have, but only if you know how to use it properly, noted frontier Dr. Samuel Thompson in his 1825 medical guide. The emergency protocols. The fire has gone out. Thomas Morrison wakes to the sound of his youngest daughter's teeth chattering uncontrollably, and he can see his breath in the cabin air. The temperature outside has dropped to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and without the fire, the interior is rapidly approaching deadly cold. He has maybe 30 minutes before hypothermia becomes a real threat to his family. This is the moment when emergency protocols mean the difference between survival and tragedy. Frontier families developed sophisticated emergency procedures for thermal crises because in the wilderness there was no one to call for help. These protocols were practiced, memorized, and executed with military precision because lives depended on split-second decisions and flawless execution. The fire restart procedure was the most critical emergency skill. Families maintained emergency fire-starting materials in multiple locations throughout the cabin: dry tinder, kindling, and fire-starting tools that were always ready for immediate use. The key was having materials that could create flame even in extremely cold conditions when normal fire starting became difficult. The emergency tinder was specially prepared for cold weather ignition. Families collected birch bark, pine pitch, and dry moss during warmer months, storing them in waterproof containers near the fireplace. Some families prepared char cloth, fabric that had been partially burned to create material that would catch spark instantly. This emergency tinder could ignite even when regular kindling was too cold or damp. The rapid warming technique required understanding of heat transfer and human physiology. When family members showed signs of hypothermia, the protocol was immediate skin-to-skin contact with the warmest family member, usually an adult male who generated the most body heat. The hypothermic person was stripped of cold, wet clothing and placed in direct contact with warm skin, then both were wrapped in dry blankets and furs. The emergency heat source creation used any available combustible material when normal firewood wasn't sufficient. Families burned furniture, clothing, books, and even structural elements of the cabin if necessary to maintain life-saving heat. The priority was always human survival over property preservation. The group warming formation was a tactical arrangement that maximized shared body heat during emergencies. Family members arranged themselves in a specific pattern, largest adults on the outside, children and elderly in the center, creating a human heat source that could sustain life even without external heating. This formation could maintain survivable temperatures for hours. The emergency food protocol focused on high-calorie, heat-generating foods that could raise core body temperature quickly. Families maintained emergency stores of fat, honey, and alcohol that could provide immediate energy for heat production. These foods were consumed in specific quantities to maximize internal heat generation without causing digestive distress. The shelter modification techniques allowed families to create smaller, more easily heated spaces within the cabin during extreme emergencies. Using blankets, furs, and furniture, they could create a tent-like structure around the fireplace that trapped heat in a smaller volume. This emergency shelter could maintain survivable temperatures with minimal fuel. The hypothermia recognition and treatment protocols were based on frontier medical knowledge that was surprisingly sophisticated. Families knew the progressive signs of hypothermia: shivering, confusion, loss of coordination, and eventual unconsciousness. The treatment involved gradual rewarming, warm liquid consumption, and careful monitoring to prevent rewarming shock. The backup heating systems provided redundancy when the primary fireplace failed. Some families maintained small braziers or metal containers that could burn charcoal or wood scraps indoors. Others used heated metal objects, tools, cookware, or specially designed warming devices that could provide localized heat for critical body areas. The emergency signaling methods allowed families to call for help from neighbors during extreme situations. Smoke signals, reflected light, and sound signals could alert other families to life-threatening emergencies. In frontier communities, these distress signals triggered immediate response from anyone within range. The survival timeline awareness helped families understand how long they could survive under different conditions. At -40 degrees Fahrenheit, an unheated cabin would become uninhabitable within 2 to 3 hours. Human survival without external heat sources was measured in hours, not days. This knowledge drove the urgency and precision of emergency responses.